Hey guys, it's Silent Night and I'm back with another video. Today we're going to be talking about Homebrew on both the 3DS and the PlayStation Vita in 2019. At the end of this video, I'm going to tell you my opinion on which one's the better value in 2019. And yes, they are both good, but I'm not going to pull some shit where I'm like, oh, well, they're both a great value and they tie. No, I'm actually going to tell you which one I think is better at the end. So stick around for that. In the background, you're going to be seeing footage captured from a PlayStation Vita, not a PlayStation TV, an actual PlayStation Vita without a capture card or anything. That's because hacked PlayStation Vitas can now output video through USB, and it's even good enough now where you can actually play on your TV if you want to. So what we just got out of there was Vita Shell, which is the hacked Vita's file browser basically, and you can do things in it such as start an FTP server to transfer files over from a computer wirelessly. You can start up an ad hoc mode to share files with other PlayStation Vitas, open a QR scanner to easily download Homebrew, although not many developers actually use this feature, and mount or unmount game storage devices, including SD2 Vita, which allows you to use an SD card with your Vita through the game cartridge slot. This is also where you can make game backups. Moving on from that, I've opened Adrenaline here, which essentially turns your Vita into a hacked PSP. Not only does this let you play backed up PSP games, but it also allows you to use save states, mess with some custom graphics settings, and most importantly, run Homebrew. Now, a lot of people don't know this about the Vita, but the Vita actually has a PSP built into it, and that's why this all works so well. Adrenaline can also run PS1 games using Sony's official PS1 native emulator that was made for the PSP. PS1 games do have to be packaged as PSX to PSP games though, and there are guides on how to do this online. As you can see looking through my games, the Vita is an excellent place to play Final Fantasy because you can play Final Fantasy 1 through 10 on it. It's also an excellent place to play games like Persona or Phantasy Star. And speaking of Phantasy Star, let's open up Retroarch, which is a multi-system emulator where you can actually play some of the older Phantasy Star games. And let me tell you, Retroarch runs them very well. When it comes to emulators that have been hacked onto the PlayStation Vita, the most intensive system it can emulate is the Nintendo 64. The only way to do that currently is through Adrenaline and PSP Homebrew. It doesn't do it well, but there is currently a bounty on it for whoever can figure it out. And when that happens, it will be included in Retroarch. Back on Retroarch a second ago, you could see all of the different systems that it could emulate. And the Vita runs them so well. I'm going to emulate a Genesis game here for you just to show you how well it runs, and it also looks amazing on the Vita, at least on my Vita, which is a fat Vita, which is the one with the OLED screen. While I'm showing you gameplay, I'll talk a little bit about this fat Vita. There are two models of the fat Vita, one that came out with 3G capability and one that didn't have that at all. Now, the one I have is the 3G one, and if you are lucky enough to own a 3G Vita, there's actually a thing called PSVSD that you can install into your Vita in place of the 3G module that adds an internal SD card slot. I did this, and now I have a 256 gig internal SD card that doesn't take up the game card slot. Moving on from that, I just showed footage of the game save manager. There's not much to it, but it works. And this is my folder where I've stored all my hacks. h-encore is the name of the best and only hack for the PlayStation Vita, but h-encore on its own is a temporary hack that you have to run every time you start the system. h-encore Enzo, on the other hand, is the permanent hack that adds on to h-encore. You can only get h-encore Enzo on certain firmwares, but luckily with another hack called Maduru, you can downgrade your firmware. So another cool thing you can do with hacks is with Vita graphics, you can actually change in-game graphics settings like you would on a PC. There's not as much there as there is on PC, but still it's something. There are some games that really struggle to run on the Vita, like Borderlands 2, and changing the settings here can really help games like that be playable. The Vita also has a Vita Homebrew browser and a PSP Homebrew browser to easily download Homebrews onto your system. It's also got custom theme support as well as custom themes apps to easily download other people's themes. It's also got a program called Moonlight that allows you to stream PC games to the Vita. Although the Vita's internet capabilities are kind of bad, so it really depends on your home Wi-Fi setup if you're going to be able to get this working for you. The Vita also has a plethora of PC ports, including Half-Life, Counter-Strike, Quake, Doom, and more. The most impressive to me actually is Half-Life, and I'll show you some gameplay for that. The reason I find it so impressive is that it almost runs at 60 FPS. It hovers between like 45 and 60, but it's really smooth and it's really cool. You can even play some of these online. And no, this is not piracy. Actually, most, if not all of these PC ports require you to transfer the original game files over yourself before you can play. While I show you some gameplay, I'll talk about some more features real quick that I don't necessarily have footage for. I'd like to mention that the Vita also has wireless game streaming, although this is more for recording gameplay than actually playing because there is latency to that. Another cool thing is that you're not locked out of the PlayStation Store when you hack your Vita. You can actually spoof firmware versions, and as long as you keep your spoofed version up to date, you can still get on the official store and buy and download things. Another cool thing you can do on a hacked Vita is cheat. Now, don't do this in multiplayer games because one, it's kind of unethical, and two, you could get banned for it. But cheating is a decent way to get around the grind of some very grindy single-player games. The Vita by default does not have a region lock on its game cartridges, and a lot of people that bought a Vita in the US bought it to play foreign games. Now on hacked Vitas, there's actually a plugin you can use to translate foreign games. So there are lots of unofficial English patches for games like Phantasy Star Nova, which I'm about to show you here. The same plugin that allows for this naturally allows for other mods to be created that don't require you to download a whole pre-patched backup of the game. Recently, the Vita has also gained another plugin that allows you to remap controls in pretty much any way you see fit. This is great for people like me who bought the trigger grip that adds two triggers, L2 and R2, to touch down on the back touchpad to simulate button clicks. This worked in PS4 Remote Play previously, and it was built for that, but now you can actually use it in standard Vita games. Speaking of input, I almost forgot to mention, you can even use a PS3 or PS4 controller to control your Vita, and it works great. The fact that the Vita can output video and you can use a controller with it has led to some people DIYing their own Nintendo Switch style docks for the Vita. Finally, you can even overclock PS Vita games by using plugins such as the PSV VSH menu. In reality, the VSH menu just does state switching. Some games run at a lower state by default, and you can switch them to higher supported states that other games run at by default. But there is another plugin with a degenerate name that I won't mention here that does support slight true overclocking. I really love my Vita, and I think it's one of the best emulation devices. I think it's even better than the GPD Win, and it costs way less. When it comes to the 3DS and 2DS, I'm going to be showing you a lot less footage because the footage has to be wirelessly streamed. This means low FPS, high latency. I do not think fast USB streaming will ever make it to the 3DS in any form other than a hardware-hacked capture card, and that's because the 3DS and 2DS don't have USB, and their charging cable does not transmit data. Another thing that goes along with that is that a lot of the apps won't stream properly, so I just simply can't show you them. One of the apps I can't show you is Twilight Menu, which is essentially Adrenaline, but for the 3DS. When you open it, it turns your 3DS into a DS, and you can launch DS and Game Boy Advance games. Like the Vita and PSP, the 3DS does have a DS built into it, so these games run really well through Twilight Menu. Another thing I can't show you is the Rosalina menu, which would normally be in place of the NTR menu that you see here. NTR is what allows me to stream the game wirelessly. Both of these menus allow you to overclock through state switching like the PS Vita and the VSH menu, but the Rosalina menu that I can't show you does have some more features for regular users. Something I can show you though is FTPD, which is just a simple FTP server for your 3DS so you can transfer files wirelessly. Speaking of files, FBI is a file browser that allows you to install Homebrew, among other things. It used to have an online Homebrew browser like the Vita has, but that got taken down recently. And as far as I'm aware, there are no replacements yet. Speaking of Homebrew on 3DS, for some reason there are two different ways to install and launch Homebrew. One of them is to install directly to your home screen and launch them from your home screen. Another way seems to be to install and launch them from the Homebrew channel app on your home screen. I don't know why there needs to be two different ways, but I guess it's good to have options. The 3DS also has a save manager in the form of Checkpoint, and like the Vita, it also has a custom themes app called Anemone. The best and only hack that is available for the 3DS right now is Luma 3DS, and unlike the Vita and h-encore, Luma 3DS actually has its own updater. The 3DS also has an app called Sharkive that lets you download cheat codes to use in the Rosalina menu. This is a one-up over the Vita and Vita Cheat because I don't believe Vita Cheat allows you to download cheat codes directly from the internet. Next up, we'll talk about emulation, and yes, the 3DS also has a build of Retroarch available. The most intensive system the 3DS can emulate, I believe, is the PlayStation 1, and it doesn't do it so well either. But I think people are working on that as well, so there might be hope for that in the future. Another thing to note is that GBA Runner, which is the Game Boy Advance emulator included with Twilight menu, isn't the best in terms of compatibility. But luckily there are alternatives included with Retroarch, and I'm also happy to say that most of the emulators on the 3DS, like the Vita, run very smoothly. Unfortunately, you're just going to have to take my word for it because the games won't stream. That's all I have to show you about the 3DS, but there are a few more things I didn't get to, including that like the Vita, the 3DS also does have PC game streaming, game backups, and if you're running the latest official firmware, you can connect to the Nintendo eShop. So, I'm sure you're all wondering at this point, which one do I think is the better value in 2019? Well, I think the better value is the PlayStation Vita. The cheapest you can find a new 3DS or 2DS, the one I have is the new 2DS, is around $110, and the cheapest you can find a used Vita for is around $100. So when the Vita offers more for a lower price, I gotta give it to the Vita. This obviously isn't taking into account game preference. Both the 3DS and Vita have some great exclusives. Arguably, the 3DS might have more, but I'm rating this solely on hackability and what you can do with it in 2019. Both hacks are almost perfect, but the 3DS hack only lets you connect to the official store if you're running the hack alongside the latest official firmware version, where the Vita you can spoof any version and always connect. Same thing goes for multiplayer. Now currently, all firmware versions for both consoles are hackable, so this isn't a problem for the 3DS yet. But if the 3DS gets an update that breaks hacks, people who stay on an older version will no longer be able to connect to the store or play online multiplayer. Other things a hacked 3DS can't do yet that a hacked Vita already can include a way to mod and translate games without having to download a pre-made backup, the ability to change in-game graphics settings, and the availability of an on-console Homebrew browser. This isn't even including the lack of functionality that is hardware limited for the 3DS, such as USB streaming or controller support. And by controller support, I mean controller support that doesn't require a Windows PC as a middleman, because there is actually a way to use a controller with a 3DS, but you do have to have a Windows PC on and running software in the background to do so. So yeah, as I promised, I gave my opinion. I think the Vita is the superior value in 2019 if you're going to hack it, but the 3DS is still a very solid option. If you'd like to pick up either of these consoles, I'll have links to them in the description. I will not, however, be doing a video showing you how to hack these devices, as Nintendo has been known to get YouTubers banned for talking about doing such. Rest in peace, Scullator. If you'd like to learn how to, you can Google it. Anyway, thanks for watching. If you're butthurt about me choosing the Vita over the 3DS, let me know in the comments. Peace.